Hi everyone. So let me get Dara on. I will just invite her to join. She should be there with us.
Okay, I think I did that properly.
You were perfect. So we're now live. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you very much, Dara. I will just take 1 minute to introduce myself and the foundation, and then I will introduce you, of course, for today's live about Thurs LGBTQ plus family planning. So my name is Isabelle Vary-Lefebvre. I'm the Executive Director of Fertility Friends Foundation. For those of you who don't know us, we are a Canadian registered charity that offers grants to cover expenses associated with fertility treatments, such as IVF, egg and sperm donations, and gestational surrogacy. We were founded a bit over a year ago, and last year we were able to give 13 grants, fertility grants of $4,000 and $5,000, and we have big plans, of course, for 2023. Plans to grow and be able to help more families, and also give you more educational content through our IG Lives and blogs. And today, it's all about Thurs LGBTQ plus family planning. We thought that it would be great to organize a live, around Family Day, and put the spotlight on this community, particularly because given the community itself, the members will have to use fertility treatments more often to grow their family. So the financial burden of fertility treatments is even greater. So that's why we contacted you, Dara, who said yes right away. To provide us with your insights and your resources about these questions. And I'd like to introduce you in a few words, if you don't mind. So Dara Roth Edney, you're the founder of Informed Fertility, and you are a reproductive counselor, and you've been practicing for over 20 years with a focus on family planning. So you support people through infertility and loss, and you're committed to support those using assisted reproductions due to sexual orientation, gender identity, and relationship status. So that's why it was so natural for us to contact you. You've done you helped many family along the years, and yourself, you went through 2 surrogacy journeys to welcome your 2 daughters, I think. Yeah. Welcome everyone, and let's start. So actually, let's start with the start. So
fantastic. Well, I just want to say first, before you begin with the questions and before we get into the answers, I just wanted to thank you so much for the work that you do. I mean, as you said, I went through surrogacy twice myself, and before surrogacy went through 5 years or so of fertility treatments. All of that was out of pocket. There was no funding at the time. And so when I think about all of the significant sorrows and pains and losses during those years, the financial burden of it was extraordinary. And so the work that you do is incredible, and it just felt like a natural and quick privilege to be able to say, yes, I would love to be able to be part of this and support you and your organization in any way. And I'm absolutely excited to be talking about the stuff that we're going to be talking about today in advance of Family Day. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dara. Thank you very much. Your support means a lot to us, to the foundation, as we're really starting to reach out to as many people as possible to let them know that we exist, that we are a resource for them. And include, the world as diverse as it is, in our foundation. So thank you very much. And then let's start. For those of you who are watching, you can also send us some questions through the chat, and we'll make sure that Dara will answer them. So the start. So how do we start? A fertility journey when I'm a member of the 2S LGBTQ
So
plus
great
community?
question. There's a number of ways to start. One way is looking to see in your own community if there are any resources, classes, programs that can overview some of the options for you. So for example, here in Toronto, we've got the 519 and the Sherbourne Health Center, and through those programs, they often have and have in the past have had programs which they've renamed and discontinued, but historically they've had programs called Daddies and Papas to Be, trans family planning, all sorts of different programming that will take you through the different kinds of things there are. I think lately they've been doing 101 fertility. And I suspect that there are programs like that all over the place. The benefit of those programs are for people who know they want kids, but aren't sure which direction they want to go. So those general programs and courses tend to give you an overview of known or anonymous sperm or egg donation, traditional surrogacy, which is where a woman uses her own eggs and she carries the baby, versus gestational surrogacy, where the egg comes from one person and the person carrying the pregnancy is another. They also give you overviews of adoption, domestic, international. So it gives you really like a full picture of different ways that people can build families. Sometimes people already know that they want to go to what we call third party or collaborative family planning. So that would be egg donation, sperm donation, embryo donation, where somebody gives you an embryo that has already been created, surrogacy. So people who know that they're going those pathways may not benefit as much from one of those general groups. And in that case, sometimes people decide that the first thing they're going to do is they're going to go speak to a reproductive lawyer. So that is certainly a great way to go if you know, for example, that you're working with a known donor, a family member or a friend. If you are thinking that you might want to do something like a co-parenting arrangement and you know that you want to really understand like what the laws are. Sometimes people start off with somebody like me, a reproductive counselor. So I'm a social worker and a reproductive counselor, as you said in your introduction. And because I'm in private practice, that also gives me the benefit of being able to have a really good perspective on the different clinics that there are, the different programs that there are. So sometimes people aren't really sure where to start. They don't know if they want a known donor. They don't know if they want to work with a surrogate. They know or don't know. They're just really exploring everything. And so sometimes somebody in my role will be able to say, well, here are some of the things to think about if you're going to look for somebody that you know. Here are places that you can go if you're thinking about an egg bank or a fresh donor program. Here's how people find surrogates. Oftentimes people who come to us don't have clinics. So we can talk about the different clinics and, you know, the sort of different things different clinics might be able to offer. So sometimes that's the pathway. Sometimes people already have a clinic because they did their own research in terms of finding a clinic, or they have a friend or a family member who recommended a clinic, and then they're starting with the clinic. There's typically an assumption in this community that there is not going to be a fertility issue, and that is often the case, and oftentimes actually things go quite seamlessly. I always do want to recommend, though, that people remember that bodies are bodies and anybody can have an experience with infertility or a diagnosis. So there's some basic stuff that you can do that is not expensive. It's likely going to be covered by benefit by like government, like OHIP, for example, in Ontario. And it doesn't have to be super invasive or painful, just things to really just get a good sense of, you know, if you're a person that has sperm, is your sperm count what would be considered typical? If you're a person who has eggs, what does your AMH, which is your follicle count, what does that look like in terms of how it doesn't stand for follicle count, actually, just shows you I'm not a doctor. It gives you a sense of how somebody might respond to treatment, how many eggs you have in your reserves. So there are tests that can be done just quickly looking to see what the uterus looks like. So sometimes people find that it's really beneficial before they get too far down the road to get a really good sense of their fertility. I think that that's also really important because everything you're doing is going to cost money. So even treatments that are covered by the government, because let's say you're doing an insemination and that the insemination itself is covered, you're paying for sperm. You need eggs, you're paying for it. So there are costs involved, even if you're going the most natural route. And so knowing that you're putting eggs and sperm and uterus together in a way that there isn't something to stand in the way to begin with can be really helpful.
The testing, you mean? Like, it's always good to do some testing ahead of time to actually explore the options that you have available, depending on you, who you
Absolutely.
are, and what you need.
And I think, you know, for me, the big thing that I feel really strongly about is people being informed. It's the name of my business, Informed Fertility. So, for example, let's say there's a grouping of people who are interested in doing a home insemination, whether they are using a known sperm donor or whether it's a co-parenting arrangement, and their perspective is, I mean, if we were a straight couple just trying, we wouldn't go to the doctor and get ultrasounds and blood work and semen analysis. We would just start trying. And so if that's what you want to do, that's fine. Like that, there's no problem with that at all. You absolutely can. The issue is more around looking at the timing involved, the logistics involved, and just asking yourself, if there was an issue, a blocked fallopian tube, a low sperm count, would we want to know that to begin with to help sort of ease our pathways and know which way to go? Or do we really want to avoid medical as long as possible? And even if it means we're doing something that might not be able to work, we would rather try that first, just like we would if we were trying naturally and we were able to do that without assistance. And that's okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Dara. And let's dig into a bit more the journey itself, you know, so whether you need an egg donation or sperm donation or surrogate to grow your family, there are many options available. So what are the criteria for you to find a good surrogate or a good donor? How would you help people who have to go this path to grow the family?
So in terms of the role that I would play, it wouldn't be, and I'm sure this is sort of just in terms of the wording, not helping somebody find their donor or their surrogate, but helping people know where they could go to look for those things. So for example, would be able to outline for people, if you are interested in eggs, if that's what you needed, then there are frozen egg banks in the States, international ones. I could talk about the different programs there are, the pros and cons, a sense of the costs of it. There are fresh donor programs in Canada, meaning a young woman goes through the egg donation process like in real time, and you get all of the eggs from that cycle. So those are called fresh donor cycles. And there's a number of excellent programs in Canada that people can explore, and we can talk about that. With surrogacy, there's different avenues people find surrogates. So I would be able to talk to people about if there's somebody in their life that they might be considering, how they might approach that person. If they're considering different programs, what programs there are, the pros and cons in some of those programs. There are some basic criteria that people would think about, but I would say that sometimes that also might shift a bit if it's somebody that you know. So for example, if you were going through an egg donation program, you would be looking for somebody who's between the ages of 20 to 30 or so. Some of the programs have donors who are 18 or 19, all the way up to 30, 31, 32. But I think about myself at 18 and I think about myself at 25, and wow, there was a difference in terms of my capacity to make decisions and executive functioning. And so I find 18, 19 is still quite young, but there are programs that will accept people like that. So there's an age criteria for sure. Now, if you had a friend or a family member that was interested in donating to you and that person was 36, then that absolutely might be worthwhile for you. That person would be older than the threshold for an egg donation program because, biologically speaking, our eggs really start to degrade quite a bit after 30 and definitely after 35. But the benefit of a known donor for you might outweigh that. And so that's fantastic. That's no problem at all. Then that person would come with you to a fertility clinic. They would do some testing. And as long as her hormone levels were at a stage and rate that was acceptable, and as long as you understood that you might get a few less eggs than you would with a younger donor, then the age is not an issue at all. So things like that can be helpful to really understand going in. Sometimes people are interested in doing what's called a reciprocal IVF cycle. So that would be when both people have, let's say, a lesbian couple. So they want to use one person's eggs and one person's uterus, and they're using a sperm donor. Historically, clinics would make those people sign documents that one was a surrogate and one was a donor. Thankfully, that is no longer the case. A reciprocal IVF cycle is not considered to be a donation or a surrogacy. It's two people having their own baby with the help of a surrogate. So in that case, with the help of a sperm donor. So in that case, what they're looking for is a sperm donor. And so sometimes a couple like that would be interested in understanding what's involved in the reciprocal IVF, what might each partner have to undergo physically in order to go through the egg retrieval, in order to have the transfer of the embryo. Are they interested in looking for a known donor or a donor through one of the sperm banks? So those are some of the things that we would be talking about.
Thank you. And you mentioned, the pros and cons of choosing a sperm donor, or, going through a sperm bank. Can you tell us more about that? Like, what's your view like on the pros and the cons?
And I would say that this is fairly equal if you're talking about a known egg donor, a known sperm donor, a known embryo donor, or a surrogate that you have within your circle. I mean, I think with all things in life, there are pros and cons to everything. Working with somebody that you know has the potential of being, for lack of a better word, messier. It also has the potential to be unbelievably beautiful. So a lot of the time it comes down to what people's goals are. So anytime somebody says to me that they are interested in an arrangement where their child will not know or have access to the donor or the surrogate, I strongly recommend they don't go the known route. That doesn't make sense. The benefit of choosing somebody that you know is so that you have that for your child. In Ontario, we have something called the All Families Are Equal Act. It is a really wonderful law in terms of protections, really clearly defines what is a donor, what is a surrogate. So some of the concerns people might have had previous to that law in terms of being recognized as a parent is no longer a concern in the same kind of way from a legal perspective. And I always advise people to speak to a lawyer. You do not have to have a signed legal agreement to be able to do a donation. I always think it's a good idea, though. In conjunction with a counselor, a lawyer can really help you think through some of the things you might not have thought about. Typically, people, when they're working with known donors and surrogates, it's because they know them, they trust them, they love them. And because of that, it's really easy to make assumptions about how different people are going to operate and just choices that we're going to make and things that might happen. But the cynic in me tends to just remind people, everybody who gets married assumes they're going to be in love forever. And we've all heard of really terrible divorces. So I think it's really important to have the opportunity to talk through some of the things involved with a lawyer, with a counselor, who just might give you things to think about that you might not thought of before. And then you all have the protection in terms of having things in writing to know what you've agreed to, what you've done. So the known route in a surrogacy can be a bit less expensive, or quite a bit less expensive. You're not paying an agency fee, and the agency fees are pretty high. You're covering expenses still, except that if it's somebody that you know, they might be more comfortable using, secondhand maternity clothes. They might have, they might be, it might be, if it's somebody that you know, they're happy to have you watch their kids when they go to an appointment, or as opposed to somebody you don't know might not want that and might want you to reasonably pay for somebody to do that. So with a surrogacy, it can be less expensive with somebody that you know. With a donation, it actually might be a little bit more expensive, because with a donation, a sperm donation, let's say from a sperm bank, you have paperwork with your clinic and you have paperwork with the sperm bank, but you don't need to hire a lawyer in that scenario. As opposed to if you're working with a friend or a family member, then you absolutely might want, and I would recommend that you speak to a reproductive lawyer. So, there's a cost difference oftentimes. Working with a frozen egg bank or frozen sperm from a bank can be fairly quick. Those gametes, the eggs and sperm, have already been quarantined if there's quarantine recommended, necessary. The donors themselves have already had their psychological assessments, their genetic screening. All of that is done because their sperm and egg are frozen already. So that can be fairly quick, as opposed to if you're working with somebody that you know, all of that stuff still has to happen.
I see. But but you know, there is this these two options: working with the frozen eggs or with a fresh donor cycle. What's the difference in terms of outcomes? Do we know exactly if there is one
I
that's
can
more
speak to that a little
successful
bit,
than the
but
other one?
of course, not a doctor or an embryologist. I do want to go back to, though, just the comment that I was saying is that I always suggest when people are thinking about this that make decisions that are going to benefit you and ultimately your child in the long run. So, for example, sometimes people make a decision because they can get to step A or B faster. And sometimes that makes sense. I know what it's like to have month after month go by and have it not work. And I know how much time means and how stressful it can be. But it's also important to remember that if it takes another 4 or 5 months to work with a known donor that you want, 5 years from now, that won't matter, right? And that is simply unaffordable for people. It is just not accessible. That is true, and that is real. It's also true that sometimes people make decisions based on the fact that one option is less expensive and it seems overwhelming now. But if you think about it, the money isn't so huge that 3 years from now it won't make a difference. So I also really encourage people to really sit down and have really fulsome discussions around what your hopes are for your child and what it is that you would like for them. This is a community that does that. It is different than people coming at this from a straight perspective where they had assumed that they wouldn't need help. And there are emotions involved that can be very complex and very different than the complicated emotions that can be involved from a queer couple perspective, for example. But you know, again, always just saying that sometimes it's helpful to talk through those things and think about those things. Because again, there's pros and cons to working with people you know, people that you don't. And there's some beauty and wonderful in both. In terms of the outcomes, with sperm, that isn't really an issue. Like what you're talking about is with eggs. What I would say is that anytime anybody is getting a sense from anywhere about success rates, my recommendation is that you ask for and make sure you have real clarity on what the success is. So I'll give you an example. Frozen eggs, success rate, is the success rate the live birth? Because typically when you hear success rates, they are not talking about live birth rates. So when you hear IVF success rates, that is a pregnancy rate. So if there's a pregnancy and there's a heartbeat at the 6-week ultrasound, and then somebody has a miscarriage at 8 weeks, from a clinic perspective, IVF was successful. And that sounds harsh and terrible. And the doctors don't think of it as being successful because they care when it doesn't work. But what didn't work wasn't the IVF, right? Like if the embryo was created and it implanted and it grew enough that there was a heartbeat, then the treatment worked. So when people are looking at success rates, really as a patient, what I care about is live birth rates, but that's often not what you're getting. So part of the issue with frozen eggs versus a fresh donor cycle is what it is that you want. So if somebody sitting in front of me says to me, I want to have 2 or 3 kids, it's really important to me that the kids are linked genetically through the same egg donor. Then frozen eggs from a bank is probably not going to get you what you want, because typically you're buying those eggs in lots of 6, maybe 8. So 6 frozen eggs is likely to give you 1 or 2 blastocysts to transfer. Each of those blastocysts, a blastocyst is an embryo at the day 5 or 6 stage of development typically. So 1 or 2 blastocysts from 6 eggs is a reasonable thing to expect. You could get more, you could get less, but 1 or 2 is fairly reasonable. Even in the best case scenario, those have somewhere between 50 or 60% implantation rate. So the idea that you could have 2 or 3 children from one lot of frozen eggs it's possible, but it is not a realistic family plan. As opposed to if you did a fresh donor cycle and that donor yielded 20 or 25 eggs, maybe you would end up with 5 or 6 embryos. The benefit of the frozen egg programs is that a lot of them have money back guarantees. So some of those guarantees are they guarantee you will end up with a blastocyst to transfer or you get a fresh round of eggs. Some of them guarantee you will have a euploid embryo, meaning an embryo that has reached the day 5 stage and has been genetically tested and is found to have the correct number of chromosomes. And there are live birth guarantees, meaning they will give you up to 6 lots of fresh eggs, of frozen eggs. And if you haven't had a live birth by that point, you will get money back. So for a lot of people, especially people who maybe have tried different avenues and haven't been successful, people who, for example, are already spending a lot of money because of their treatment choices, sometimes those guarantees feel really good. People who know they only want one child, the frozen eggs, like you order them and they're there like pretty quickly. So there's some benefits to that. The fresh programs, you have if it goes well, you get a lot more embryos and you get a lot more chances. But if it doesn't go well, there aren't money back guarantees the same way there are with fresh. So again, it isn't that one is better than the other. It's that one is better for some situations.
Yeah, asking yourself the questions of what you want your family to look like. So then you choose the best.
Exactly. The other piece of it as well is that part of that is what you want from the donor arrangement. So for example, in Canada, the fresh donor programs that we have are typically fairly small programs run by typically women, often who have been egg donors themselves, and they are in close touch with all of their donors. So if you are looking at a donor profile and you think, you know, this one is really appealing, but you would love to know a little bit more about XYZ, or, you know, you like the sort of look of her, but the pictures that she has are those sort of like Instagram glam shots. And, you know, she said that she likes running or she likes horses, or you would just like some more natural pictures of her. You know, you have more capacity to get that information. The Canadian programs typically also have options of actually meeting your donor. So where it started off as an anonymous arrangement through the program, but if the donor is open to meeting you either in real life or over FaceTime or whatnot, that's possible. The idea that when your child is a bit older that they could meet her. So there's a lot of flexibility in the Canadian programs because they're small. So absolutely, if that's something that's important to people, which I hope it is, giving your child the opportunity to know their genetics is an important factor in all of this. More and more, the programs that have frozen eggs do offer the option of having what's called open ID or identity release, where your child can find out information once they're 18. But not all of the programs offer that, and none of them offer the opportunity for you to actually meet your donor and know who she is and be able to directly be in contact with her. And that's something that a lot of the Canadian programs have. So again, talking through these kinds of things can be really helpful as you're doing this. And that's where a reproductive counselor like myself can be really helpful, because those are questions people might not know to ask. And sometimes before somebody meets me, they've already chosen their sperm donor, or they've already chosen their surrogate, or they've already chosen their egg donor, and that's fine. But sometimes it does happen that we start talking about these things and they realize they wish that they had taken those things into consideration before making those choices. So I think it's great to be able to look into programs before you actually meet with a specialist. But my recommendation is, if you're going to be going through an egg bank or a fresh program or a surrogacy agency or program, that you do, before you put money down, that you do take advantage of the skills and knowledge that myself and my colleagues in this field have in terms of helping you walk you through some of those questions.
Yeah, just preparing actually for the life of the child that is going to be born, and what relationship you might have with the donors or not. It's very precious advice, I think, that you're giving to be able to plan ahead and think of all these questions that, you know, we might not think of while going through all of this journey. I know there are lots of questions around surrogacy as well, and about maybe the relationship between a surrogate and the expected parents. What kind of relationship relationship is typical with a
Yeah.
surrogate during
So
and
in
after
Canada,
pregnancy?
the surrogacy, like gamete donation, is not paid. So there really is a sense that there is going to be a relationship. Typically, surrogates are looking for a connection with intended parents. They are not looking for a new best friend. That's very rare that I would get a sense of that. And in fact, that is something that I screen for when I do surrogacy assessments. So they're not looking for a new best friend, but they are looking for a warm, a friendly, an involved, an open relationship during the surrogacy. Typically, surrogates are hopeful and excited that intended parents or parent will be at appointments, will be in contact throughout. I was really fortunate with both of my surrogacy experiences, and I was at every single appointment with my surrogates, every single time that there was an opportunity to hear a heartbeat or see an ultrasound. I was there. It definitely made it really special. And so that is fairly common. It's not always possible because surrogates and intended parents don't always live in the same place. So, sometimes that's not possible, but thanks to, FaceTime and Zoom and all of that, people often are able to join in virtually into appointments. So typically people are in touch quite a bit throughout. And certainly one of the things I suggest is that this is an area where you have to be honest because you are dealing with somebody else. So if you know that what you're looking for is really a business arrangement where you want your surrogate to give you updates, you anticipate being respectful and making sure that her needs are met within the bounds of the law and your contract, but you're really not interested in texting with her every day or having like a FaceTime with her once a week or meeting her kids, like you really want it to be more business, that's okay. But you need to say that because that's not what most surrogates are looking for. And because you're dealing with a human and their emotions, you want to be fair and reasonable to everybody involved. So being able,
So
really
would be at the
thinking about like what it is that you want. And sometimes people don't know. Sometimes people say like, I think I want more business. And then they meet the surrogate and they're like, oh, she's so nice. And then it more develops, and that's okay too. But typically people do have fairly involved relationships where they do, message each other throughout. It's really nice to be able to talk about things that are going on in each other's lives at not like a deep level, but enough to show your surrogate that you don't think of her just as like a vessel, that you're aware that she has maybe a partner or children or siblings, or, that you're just aware of what's happening in her life. Oftentimes people who live in different cities will tell me that they take pictures out their window, or if they go on vacation or their surrogate is somewhere, that they send pictures back and forth, that they're aware of their surrogate's children's birthdays and send birthday wishes, or, just that it's a human connection. After a much, so yay me. After a baby is born, of course, it's very typical that the relationships eases up a little bit. And what people are looking for, again, changes. So if you know for a fact that after a baby is born, you never want to speak to your surrogate again, that is 100% you're right. But you absolutely have to be honest about that. It is actually quite cruel to have a surrogate believe otherwise and then to have that happen. That's actually quite rare. Most intended parents feel obligation makes it sound bad, but feel a gratitude that makes them like the idea of at least once a year sending, and it's so easy with virtual, sending an email, sending a picture, right? So for me, and I was in touch with my surrogates throughout our journeys. I went to every appointment. We were in touch quite often because I was unbelievably anxious and they were quite patient with me. My kids are now 17 tomorrow and 19, and so obviously I don't speak to them every day now, but still that idea of on my daughter's birthdays I send a message, on Mother's Day I always send a message thanking them, on their birthdays, so that idea typically of, as the years go on, that it's once a year, twice a year. Sometimes people do develop a nice connection and it's sort of like, oh, if I'm passing through your town, we'll get together, that kind of thing.
Thank you very much, Dara. Is there anything else that you'd like to say today during this live? Any other question that we didn't address during the live that you feel is important to answer?
I would say asking lots of questions and knowing who to ask the questions to. Oftentimes people go into this with an assumption that it will be straightforward, not necessarily in terms of the choices that you're making, because obviously there are all kinds of complicated choices, but sometimes there's a feeling that like once the eggs and sperm in uterus are in place, everything should go really smoothly. And that attitude is reinforced for sure by messages around you when everyone's like, everything looks great, this is so fantastic. And oftentimes it does, it goes really smoothly and really beautifully. But that can also make it much more devastating when there is a bump in the road, when a cycle is canceled or somebody has a miscarriage, or, you know, like there are things that can happen. And so the more you're armed with information about like, where are the things that, like, what are the things that can go wrong? Like, this is my treatment, this is what I'm doing. Where are the places along the way where we should just be aware that something could go awry? Really understanding success rates. Right? When your doctor tells you something, asking like, what is that a success of? Understanding your chances, understanding if you're going to have a test done, if you're getting a semen analysis, then knowing what are the parameters they're looking for. You know, 10 million sperm sounds like a lot of sperm, but that's actually a low count. Right? So really understanding so that way by the time you get results back, you already understand what it is. And your expectations are really in line with what's happening. So, no, you know, asking questions, checking in, taking advantage of the people out here who really are there to help and support you. It's family building is incredible. There are fantastic resources out there, and it's really exciting to be able to build families in. There are so many different ways of building families now, and one of the beautiful things about this community that we're talking to today is that there are opportunities to really build families in a way that meet your values, and that thinking ahead meet the goals that you have for this little human that you're trying to bring into the world. And that's so beautiful.
So the golden advice that you're giving is to stay informed. Actually, for all of you who would like to ask more questions to Dara, you can find her on Instagram now it's at dara.inform.fertility, and maybe you can give your website as well.
It's www.informedfertility.ca.
Perfect. And thank you so much, Dara. Thank you. It was a very informative session, and I hope that we helped a lot of people today. And in terms of the next IG Live for the foundation, it's going to be on Thursday, March 2nd with Dr. Chloé Roumain. And we're going to talk about the relationship between endometriosis and infertility. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Thank you so much again, Dara.
Thank you.
And
bye.
We'll see you soon.